The forbidden city at dusk, its glazed tiles glowing with a soft golden light. Deep within this palace, there was a place called the Inner Court. There lived the emperor's consorts, dressed in magnificent robes adorned with pearls and jade, appearing supremely noble. But every woman who stepped into the inner court knew that beneath this glamorous facade lay countless dangers. To serve the ruler is like sleeping beside a tiger. A single glance from the emperor could send one soaring to great heights. A single word could cast one into the abyss. And any stirring in the outer court could ripple into the inner court, implicating the innocent. Here there was one fate that all women feared most. That was being banished to the cold palace. The cold palace was not a specific palace, but a form of punishment. When a consort made a mistake, or lost favor, or was caught up in political turmoil, she might be sent to some remote corner of the palace, stripped of everything, forgotten by all. She would slowly grow old there, slowly wither away, until death. Such a fate could befall anyone at any moment. Many people think the cold palace is an actual palace. That is how it is always portrayed in television dramas. A gloomy great hall, doors and windows tightly shut. Cobwebs everywhere, a fallen consort sitting alone in a dim room, staring blankly at candlelight. Occasionally a loyal maid keeps her company, the two depending on each other for survival, waiting for the day the emperor might change his mind. The real cold palace was far more cruel than this. There was never a palace in the forbidden city called the Cold Palace. The term referred to a state, a form of punishment. Consorts banished to the Cold Palace would be sent to various remote corners of the palace, perhaps a side room of some abandoned hall, perhaps a narrow alley between palace walls, perhaps a desolate corner where even eunuchs and palace maids were unwilling to go. During the Ming Dynasty, these places were usually in the Jiangxi area. There were several courtyards there, long neglected, with peeling walls and overgrown weeds. The rooms were small, poorly lit, bone-chillingly cold in winter and stifling in summer. No fine furniture, no lavish decorations, only the most basic beds and tables and chairs, some without even complete doors or windows. During the Qing dynasty, the locations of the Cold Palace became more scattered. Some were in the northern three quarters, some in Jingyang Palace, some in nameless little courtyards. In any case, they were all places no one wanted to go, no one wanted to mention. Those places were terrifyingly quiet, quiet enough to drive a person mad. Apart from the occasional passing eunuch, hardly a soul could be seen. Women sent here would undergo a complete change in status. Yesterday she was still consort so-and-so, concubine so-and-so, with rank, with stipend, with swarms of palace maids and eunuchs attending her. Today she was nothing. Her title stripped away, her stipend cut off, her original maids reassigned, leaving only one or two of the lowest servants, or none at all. Her meals would become extremely meager. No more dishes carefully prepared by the imperial kitchen, no more seasonal fruits and pastries. What was delivered each day might only be a bowl of thin porridge, a few steamed buns, and a small dish of pickled vegetables. Sometimes even these couldn't be guaranteed. It depended on the mood of the eunuch in charge, on whether anyone remembered that such a person still existed. Her clothes would no longer be changed either. Whatever she wore when entering the Cold Palace might be what she'd wear for the rest of her life. No one to mend torn clothes, no one to wash dirty ones. A consort who once lived in silk and luxury would slowly become disheveled and filthy, no different from a beggar. The most terrifying thing wasn't the material deprivation, but the mental torment. No one spoke in the Cold Palace. That kind of silence could kill. Day after day, year after year, nothing could be heard except one's own breathing. No one came to visit, no one came to ask after her, no news came in from outside. She didn't know what was happening out there, didn't know if the emperor still remembered her, didn't know how much longer she would have to stay here. The only thing she could do was wait for a pardon decree that would never come, wait for a turning point that would never appear, wait for death to end it all. Some women couldn't hold on and went mad. They began talking to themselves, began speaking to the walls, began screaming in the middle of the night. Some women chose a more resolute way out, with white silk, with scissors, with anything they could find to end their own lives, and even more women simply faded away slowly and silently. One day, the eunuch in charge noticed that the food delivered had been left untouched. Pushing open the door, he saw a cold corpse. Then it was rolled up in a straw mat, carried out through the back door, and buried in some unknown place. No funeral, no tombstone. No one would remember she ever existed. History is a long river. It flows from ancient times, passing through countless dynasties, countless palaces, countless human joys and sorrows. The water is murky, carrying sand and silt, and most things sink to the riverbed, never to be retrieved. The women in the cold palace mostly sank like this. They were like autumn leaves drifting into the water, swirling a few times, then swept into the depths, vanishing without a trace. No one remembers their faces, no one remembers their voices, no one even remembers they ever existed. But occasionally, a few leaves would wash up on the shore. They were buried by silt, eroded by time, but still left behind some traces. Through those faint marks we can glimpse the outlines of some stories. Let us follow the river of time, slowly walking back. The Ming Dynasty. The Jingtai-era winter in the capital city was very cold. The wind blew from the northwest, carrying the chill of the Mongolian plateau, passing through the city walls, through the palace gate, through layer upon layer of palace halls, finally seeping into every corner. The palace maids walked with their necks hunched. The eunuchs tucked their hands into their sleeves. Even the old trees in the imperial garden trembled in the cold. In such a harsh winter, a woman was moved out of Cunning Palace. Her name was Lady Wang. Just a few days ago, she was still the empress, the mother of the nation. She had the most magnificent palace, the most exquisite garments, the most respectful servants. Her husband was the son of heaven. Her son was a prince, and her future seemed bright. But now all of that was over. She had been deposed. The reason was simple, yet also complicated. Her husband, the Jingtai emperor, wanted to change the crown prince, and she firmly opposed it. She said doing so violated propriety and would shake the foundation of the nation. She pleaded earnestly once, twice, 3 times. She thought her husband would listen, thought their years of marital bond would move him. She was wrong. The Jingtai emperor chose power and abandoned her, an imperial edict, a few eunuchs, a shabby sedan chair. Just like that, she left Cunning Palace, where she had lived for years, sent to a secluded courtyard in the northwest corner of the palace city. The sedan moved slowly, passing through gate after gate, each one like a period completely separating her from her past life. No one came to see her off. Her former palace maids kept their heads lowered, not daring to look at her. Her former eunuchs stayed far away, afraid of being tainted by her misfortune. Even her husband, the man who had shared hardships with her for years, did not appear. When the sedan chair stopped, it was already dark. She walked into that small room and looked around. The wall plaster was peeling, the window paper was torn, and the table and chairs were as crude as furniture from a rural farmhouse. In the corner was a bed covered with thin bedding that didn't look warm. This would be her home from now on. She stood by the window for a long time, gazing at the pitch-black night sky outside. No moon, no stars, only endless darkness. Wind crept in through the gaps in the torn window paper, bone-chillingly cold. She didn't cry, she just stood there quietly, like a stone statue. 5 years, she spent a full 5 years in that small room. What does 5 years mean? It is more than 1,800 days and nights, countless quiet mornings and long dusks, the cycle of spring passing and autumn coming, flowers blooming and falling. She watched the old locust tree outside the window bud, grow leaves, shed leaves, wither, and then bud again. Year after year, over and over, her hair slowly turned white, her skin slowly became rough, her eyes slowly lost their luster. No one came to see her. Her husband didn't come, her family didn't come, her former friends didn't come either. It was as if she had been forgotten by the entire world, existing alone in that tiny corner. Occasionally, eunuchs would bring some food, plain tea and simple meals, barely enough to fill her stomach. She didn't complain, nor was she in any position to. She just ate in silence, then continued to wait. Wait for what? She didn't know herself. Perhaps for a decree of pardon, perhaps for her husband to change his mind, or perhaps just for death to end it all. 5 years later, fate took another turn. Emperor Yingzong was restored to the throne. Her husband, the Jingtai emperor, was deposed and died shortly after. She was released from the cold palace and saw sunlight once again. But she was no longer who she used to be. Historical records say that when she came out, she was weathered and haggard. That once gentle and beautiful woman had been worn beyond recognition by time and suffering. Her husband was dead. Her son had died young long ago. She had nothing left. Emperor Yingzong, remembering that she had once opposed deposing the crown prince, treated her fairly well, allowing her to live out her remaining years with the title of princess consort. She lived for many more years. Many more years. until the Chenghua era, when she finally closed her eyes. No one knows whether during those long years she still dreamed of her younger days, dreamed of the spring when she first met her husband, dreamed of those nights when they admired flowers together, drank wine together, and looked forward to the future together. No one knew whether she had forgiven the man who abandoned her. These questions would never have answers. Time continued to flow. The Ming dynasty passed, and the Qing dynasty came. The Forbidden City was still that same Forbidden City, with red walls and yellow tiles, majestic and magnificent. But the people living inside changed batch after batch, and the stories changed one after another. During the Guangxu era, a young consort lived in the Forbidden City, named Consort Zhen. She was different from the other consorts. The other consorts were quiet, obedient, and cautious like carefully trimmed bonsai. But she was lively, clever, and had her own ideas like a wild flower, full of vibrant life. The Guangxu emperor liked her very much. In that oppressive and stifling Forbidden City, she was one of his few comforts. They often rode together, discussed current affairs together, and imagined the future of this country together. She supported his reform proposals and encouraged him to be an emperor who could make a difference. But she had a deadly enemy. Empress Dowager Cixi, that old woman who controlled the entire empire, did not like this young consort. She was too flamboyant, too favored, and she stood on the emperor's side, supporting those reforms that made Cixi feel threatened. In the 20th year of Guangxu, Cixi found an excuse. Consort Zhen was accused of interfering in court politics and selling official positions. Whether these charges were true or false no longer mattered. What mattered was that Cixi wanted to get rid of her. By imperial decree, Consort Zhen was stripped of her title and banished to the Cold Palace. She was confined in a small courtyard north of Jingqi Pavilion. It was a very small courtyard, surrounded by high walls on all sides, with only a tiny door. Sunlight could barely reach inside, and wind could hardly blow in. She was like being sealed in a box, cut off from the entire world. Emperor Guangxu wanted to visit her, but was strictly forbidden by Empress Dowager Cixi. He could only gaze from afar in that direction, imagining what she looked like inside. 6 years she spent 6 years in that small courtyard. 6 years was enough to turn a lively young girl into a silent woman. Her smile disappeared, her words became fewer, and a layer of grey mist gradually clouded her eyes. No one knew how she endured those days. Perhaps she would secretly weep in the dead of night. Perhaps she would talk to herself facing the walls. Perhaps she just sat quietly, watching the clouds slowly drifting across the sky. Did she still hold on to hope? Hope that one day Empress Dowager Cixi would change her mind. Hope that one day Emperor Guangxu could come to save her. Hope that one day she could walk out of that tiny door again. We don't know the year of Zhengzi. The artillery of the Eight-Nation Alliance blasted open the gates of the capital city. Empress Dowager Cixi decided to flee west with Emperor Guangxu. Before departing, she made a decision. She ordered someone to bring Consort Zhen to Ningshou Palace. It was a sweltering summer day, the cicadas deafeningly loud. Consort Zhen was brought before Cixi, kneeling on the ground. She hadn't seen this many people in a long time, and the sunlight was so harsh she could barely open her eyes. What Cixi said, what Consort Zhen said, no one knows for certain. Some say Consort Zhen begged Cixi not to take the emperor away, to let him stay and take charge of the situation. Some say she never yielded until death, never bowed to Cixi. Whatever the truth, the ending was the same. Cixi ordered her thrown into a well. That well was in the northeast corner of the Palace of Tranquil Longevity. The opening was small, the water deep. When Consort Zhen was pushed in, she let out a brief scream. Then came the muffled sound of a body hitting water. Then silence. She was only 25 when she died. Later, that well came to be known as Consort Zhen's Well. It is still there in the Forbidden City, sitting quietly in that corner. The opening has been sealed, moss growing all around it. Tourists occasionally pass by, take a glance, snap a photo, then keep walking. No one lingers there for long. After all, it is just a well, a silent, ancient well that has witnessed too many tragedies. Lady Wang and Consort Zhen, at least they left their names behind. Their stories are recorded in history books, passed down by later generations, adapted into plays and films. Their tragedies, at least, are still remembered. But so many more women didn't even leave a name. History books would only record a simple sentence. In such year and month, a certain consort was deposed for such reason and relocated to such place, and then nothing more. What happened to them afterwards? How long did they stay in the cold palace? How did they die? Where were they buried? No one knows, and no one cares. They were like dust in the wind, scattered in the long river of history, their traces never to be found again. Perhaps they were consorts abandoned for failing to bear sons. Perhaps they were palace maids punished for offending the Empress Dowager. Perhaps they were innocents implicated by their family's crimes. Perhaps they did nothing wrong at all, just happened to stand in the wrong place, happened to become sacrifices in power struggles. In that era, a woman's fate was never in her own hands. They were selected into the palace, not because they wanted to be. They gained or lost favor, not because of their own choices. They were banished to the cold palace, often not because of their own faults. They were merely chess pieces. Once used up, they were discarded in corners. Like fallen leaves in autumn, like burnt-out candles, like forgotten old belongings. Slowly, silently, they vanished into the dust of time. Night deepened. The forbidden city fell into silence. Moonlight spilled over the red walls and yellow tiles, over the empty plazas, over those secluded corners that had once imprisoned countless women. The wind blew gently, carrying with it faint sounds, like sighs, like whispers, like those forgotten souls telling their stories. But no one heard. This ancient palace had grown accustomed to silence. Let us leave behind those dim courtyards, those lonely figures. For now, let us step back, stand somewhere higher, and look down upon this vast palace. From this angle, the forbidden city resembles a precise chessboard, each hall a square, each person a piece. The cold palace is also part of this chessboard. It didn't appear by chance, wasn't some emperor's whimsical invention. It was a system, a carefully designed system. It had its reasons for existing, its logic for operating. To understand the cold palace, we must first understand the imperial palace. To understand the imperial palace, we must first understand power. What is the imperial palace? On the surface, it is where the emperor lives. Magnificent golden halls, ornately carved pavilions, countless rooms, countless servants. It is the most luxurious residence in the world, a symbol of power, the heart of the empire. But if we look closely, we'll notice some strange things. Many women live in the imperial palace. Empress, imperial consort, concubine, beauty, talented lady, noble lady. All kinds of titles, all kinds of ranks. They numbered from dozens at the least to hundreds or even thousands at the most. They lived in different palaces, wore clothes of different colors, and enjoyed treatment of different standards. Why were so many women needed? The answer is simple and cruel. They were tools for reproduction. In that era, the succession of the throne was a matter of utmost importance. The emperor needed sons, needed many sons, because the infant mortality rate was high. A prince might not live to adulthood, so the emperor needed to have many children, needed backups, needed to ensure there would be successors to the throne. The number of children one woman could bear was limited, so the emperor needed many women. This was the fundamental reason for the existence of the imperial harem. It wasn't to satisfy the emperor's desires, though that was also one of the reasons, but to ensure the continuation of the empire. Every consort was a potential mother of a prince. Every imperial visit was a political investment. Since the imperial harem was a reproductive institution, it had to have rules for management. Resources were limited. The emperor's time was limited, the palace's space was limited, and the treasury's silver was also limited. It was impossible to let every consort live in a luxurious palace, impossible to let every consort receive the emperor's favor. So there came the hierarchy system. The empress was the most honored, living in the finest palace, enjoying the highest treatment. Then came the imperial noble consort, concubine, ranked one level after another going down. The higher the rank, the more resources, the lower the rank, the fewer resources. This is a distribution mechanism, but the problem is, ranks aren't fixed. A low-ranking consort, if she gains the emperor's favor, can be promoted. A high-ranking consort, if she loses the emperor's favor, can be demoted. More importantly, if a consort gives birth to a prince, her status rises significantly. If her son is made crown prince, she might even become the future Empress Dowager. This creates competition. Fierce, brutal, life or death competition. Every consort wants to gain the emperor's favor, wants to give birth to a prince, wants her son to become crown prince. They use every trick in the book, every means available. Some rely on beauty, some on talent, some on cunning, some on their family's power. In this competition, some win, some lose. The winners rise to glory, enjoying wealth and honor. The losers end up in the cold palace. The cold palace is a punishment, but it is a very special kind of punishment. If a consort commits a serious crime, like treason or regicide, she'd be executed. The death penalty is the harshest punishment, clean, swift, done and over with. If a consort makes a minor mistake, like a breach of etiquette or talking back, she'd have her salary docked, be demoted, or be confined for a few days. That is a light punishment, a warning to teach her a lesson, but the cold palace is different. The cold palace is a punishment between death and light penalty. It doesn't kill you, but it doesn't let you go either. It lets you live, but living is worse than death. It strips you of everything: status, wealth, freedom, hope, but preserves your life, letting you slowly waste away over the long years. Why design such a punishment? Because some people can't be killed, but can't be kept either. For example, a fallen from favor concubine. She hasn't committed any major crime. The emperor just doesn't like her anymore. Kill her? No reason to. Let her go. Impossible. She knows too many palace secrets. Keep her in the harem. She'd be an eyesore, cause trouble, make the new favorite concubine unhappy. What to do? Send her to the cold palace. Out of sight, out of mind. She is still alive, but she no longer exists. She won't die, but she'll never appear in anyone's sight again. She has been thoroughly, completely, permanently marginalized. This is a carefully designed forgetting. The cold palace has another function. It is a deterrent. The women in the harem all know the cold palace exists. They know what it is like there, know what happens to those who enter. This knowledge, like a seed, is planted in their hearts, takes root and sprouts, growing into fear. Fear makes people obedient. A consort who fears being sent to the cold palace will be more careful, more cautious in her words and actions. She won't dare offend the emperor, won't dare offend the empress dowager, won't dare offend anyone with power. She'll suppress her personality, hide her thoughts, and become a docile, obedient, unthreatening person. This is exactly what the rulers want. The cold palace doesn't need to imprison many people. It just needs to exist, just needs to occasionally lock up a few people, and that is enough to keep the entire harem in order. It is a sword hanging overhead. It doesn't need to fall. It just needs to hang there to make everyone feel fear. This is the art of power, achieving maximum effect with minimum cost. Now, let's return to those women in the cold palace. Why don't they resist? Why don't they escape? Why don't they try to change their fate? Because they have nowhere to go. In that era, once a woman entered the imperial palace, she could never leave again. Her household registration was cancelled, her family ties were severed, her entire existence belonged to the emperor. She wasn't an independent person, but the emperor's property. Property cannot decide its own comings and goings. Even if she escaped from the cold palace, where could she go? Return to her family. Her relatives would be implicated. Hide among the common people. The whole country would be hunting for her. Become a nun. The temples wouldn't dare take her in. She has nowhere to run. Moreover, the cost of escaping is too high. If caught and brought back, what awaits her would be even harsher punishment, or even execution. Not only would she herself die, but her family would also be implicated. So they don't escape. They could only stay in that small courtyard, day after day, year after year, waiting for a pardon that might never come, or waiting for death. This was a maze with no exit. On say you went in, you could never come out again. The cold palace system lasted through many dynasties. From the Han Dynasty to the Qing Dynasty, nearly 2,000 years. Dynasties rose and fell, emperors changed one after another, but the cold palace always existed. It was like a stubborn tradition, passed down from generation to generation. Why did no one abolish it? Because it was useful. For the emperor, the cold palace is an effective tool for managing the harem. It can punish disobedient consorts, intimidate other women, and maintain order in the harem. Without the cold palace, what would the harem become? Jealousy, scheming, even murder and rebellion. The cold palace is a necessary evil. For the empress dowager and the empress, the cold palace is a means of eliminating dissidents. Those consorts who threaten their position, those women who make them feel uneasy, can all be sent to the cold palace. No need to kill, no need to bear a bad reputation, just one decree, and the problem is solved for the entire bureaucratic system. The cold palace is a convention. It has existed for so long that it has become part of the system. No one questions it. Everyone is used to it. Everyone accepts it. Once a system is formed, it takes on a life of its own. It perpetuates itself, reinforces itself, until one day an external force shatters it completely. The Qing dynasty fell. In 1912, the Xuantong emperor abdicated and the Republic of China was established. The imperial system that had lasted over 2,000 years finally came to an end. The concubines in the Forbidden City were dismissed. Some of them returned to their family homes. Some married commoners. Some became nuns. They took off those gorgeous garments, removed those heavy jewelry, and became ordinary women. The cold palace was also emptied. Those dark courtyards, those dilapidated houses, no one lived there anymore. They were abandoned in the corners of the palace city, slowly collapsing, slowly decaying. Later, the Forbidden City became the Palace Museum. Tourists poured in from all directions to visit this ancient palace. They walked through the magnificent hall of supreme harmony, through the exquisite imperial garden, taking photos, making memories, marveling. But few would venture to those remote corners. There was nothing to see there, just some dilapidated buildings, some overgrown courtyards, some forgotten history. The era of the cold palace had ended, but those stories, those women, those tragedies buried deep in time, did not disappear. They are still there, quietly waiting for someone to discover, to listen, to remember. The night grew deeper. The moon rose to the center of the sky, casting a silvery white glow. The Forbidden City slumbered in this light, like an ancient dream, a dream of splendor, of glory, and of endless sorrow. The wind blew gently, stirring up faint sounds, like a sigh, like a whisper, like those forgotten souls, softly telling their stories under the moonlight. Let us step into the cold palace, not as an observer, not as a historian, but as someone who lived there. Let us see through her eyes, hear through her ears, feel that world through her skin. Let us experience what a day in the cold palace is like. Outside the window was a thick darkness, like ink, without a trace of light to be seen. The room was even darker, so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Only the occasional chirping of insects reminded her that the world was still turning. She woke up, not awakened by any sound. But naturally, after staying in the cold palace for so long, her sleep had become light and fragmented. She would wake up several times every night, then lie in the darkness, listening to her own breathing, waiting for dawn. The bedding was a bit damp. This was a common problem in southern palaces. The air always carried a musty smell, clothes wouldn't dry, and quilts couldn't stay warm. She wrapped the quilt tighter around herself, curling into a ball, trying to preserve a bit of body heat. She thought of the past. She used to live in a magnificent palace, with thick brocade quilts, warm charcoal fires, and palace maids keeping watch through the night. Back then, she never knew what cold meant, what dampness meant, what loneliness meant. Those days felt like something from a past life. Dawn slowly broke. At first it was just a faint grey, seeping through the gaps in the window paper. Then the grey turned to pale blue, and the pale blue turned to light gold. The light seeped in bit by bit, like water slowly filling the entire room. She got up. Her movements were slow, sluggish. Her joints were somewhat stiff, needing to be moved before they could loosen up. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly out the window, watching that small patch of sky change from black to blue, from blue to white. No one came to wake her. In the past, palace maids would come every morning to attend to her washing and grooming. Warm water, soft towels, exquisite vanity cases. She only needed to sit there doing nothing, and naturally someone would take care of everything. Now she had to do it herself. She walked to the corner where there was a clay basin filled with water fetched yesterday. The water had gone cold, icy to the touch. She cupped some water in her hands and splashed it on her face. The chill made her shiver, but it also woke her up completely. She faced a blurry bronze mirror and simply combed through her hair. The person in the mirror, she barely recognized her anymore. A haggard face, dull eyes, graying hair. That once radiant and beautiful woman had already vanished into the depths of time. She didn't look for long. She had learned not to look at mirrors. The hour of Chen, a young eunuch, brought breakfast. He set the food box at the door, knocked, and left. No greeting, no small talk, not even a proper glance at her. To him, she was just someone who needed to be fed, no different from the cats and dogs in the palace. She opened the food box. Inside was a bowl of thin porridge, a few pieces of pickled vegetables, and 2 cold steamed buns. The porridge had already gone cold, a thin film forming on the surface. The pickles were so salty they tasted bitter, and the buns were hard as rocks. She ate slowly. No complaints, no fussing. She had gotten used to food like this. When she first entered the cold palace, she couldn't stomach these things and often went hungry. Later, hunger taught her what compromise meant. After eating, she put the bowls and chopsticks back in the food box and placed it at the door. Simone would come to collect it in a while. After breakfast, the long day had only just begun. What could she do? There were no books to read. Books weren't allowed in the cold palace. They feared she might see something she shouldn't see, think about things she shouldn't think about. There was no needle and thread to work with. She had once asked for some fabric and thread to pass the time, but she was refused. They were afraid she would hurt herself with the needle, or make a rope from the cloth strips. There was no one to talk to. Perhaps other women lived in the neighboring courtyards, but they were strictly forbidden from communicating. Occasionally she heard some sounds through the walls, but she had never seen their faces. She could only sitting by the window watching the tree in the courtyard. It was an old locust tree, who knows how many years it had been growing here. In spring it would sprout tender green buds. In summer it would grow dense shade in autumn. It would drop golden leaves in winter. It would become bare branches. She watched it, year after year. It was her only friend. Sometimes a bird would fly over and perch on a branch. She would hold her breath, afraid of startling it. She watched it preen its feathers, watched it look around, watched it flutter its wings and fly away. Then she was alone in the courtyard again. The sun rose to its highest point. Sunlight slanted in from the courtyard, casting a bright patch of light on the ground. She shifted her position, letting herself sit in the sunlight, warm and cozy. This was the most comfortable moment of the day. The sunlight dispelled the dampness in the room, and also dispelled some of the gloom in her heart. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the light falling on her face, like a gentle hand caressing her. She thought of many things. She thought of playing in the courtyard of her hometown as a child. The sunlight just as warm and cozy. She thought of when she first entered the palace, admiring flowers in the imperial garden, sunlight filtering through the petals, casting dappled shadows. She thought of those days when she was favored, strolling by the lake with the emperor, sunlight dancing on the water's surface, sparkling brightly. Those memories, like faded paintings, grew more and more blurry, more and more distant. She didn't know how much longer she could remember them. Perhaps one day she would forget everything, forget her own name, forget where she came from, forget who she once was. She would become an empty shell, a person without a past, slowly withering away in this tiny courtyard. The sunlight gradually shifted, leaving the spot where she sat. She opened her eyes, watching that patch of light slowly shrink, slowly disappear. Afternoon had arrived. Afternoon was the hardest time to endure. The sunlight had already tilted westward, and the room became dim again. But there was still a long time before dark, so long it seemed endless. She began to walk around the courtyard. The courtyard was very small, only a few steps wide. She walked along the base of the wall, 1 lap, 2 laps, 3 laps, counting her footsteps, counting the bricks on the wall, counting anything that could be counted. This was her way of passing time. When she got tired of walking, she squatted down to watch the ants on the ground. A group of tiny ants busily carrying food. They formed a long line stretching from a hole in the corner of the wall all the way to a breadcrumb in the center of the courtyard. She watched them for a long time. Their world was so small, yet so busy. They didn't know they lived in a palace, didn't know how many joys and sorrows had happened in this palace. They only knew to carry food, store provisions, and prepare for winter. Perhaps being an ant wouldn't be so bad. At least they had something to do. The sun set. The sky was dyed orange-red, then rose, then purple, and finally deep blue. The clouds looked as if they had been burned by fire, their edges rimmed with golden light. She stood by the window, watching all of this. This was the most beautiful moment of the day. No matter how dilapidated the cold palace was, no matter how bleak life was, the evening sky was always just as beautiful. It wouldn't change because of her circumstances, wouldn't dim because of her sorrow. It just burned quietly, then slowly faded away. Like her life, dinner was delivered. Similar to breakfast, still thin porridge, still pickled vegetables, still cold steamed buns. She ate mechanically, unable to taste anything. Food was only for sustaining life, not for enjoyment. After eating, the sky had already turned completely dark. No lamps, lighting lamps wasn't allowed in the cold palace, for fear of fire. She could only fumble around in the darkness, find the bed, and lie down. The darkness was like a giant hand, wrapping her entire being within it. She lay with her eyes open, staring at the darkness above her head. She couldn't see anything, only endless black. Occasionally, a sliver of moonlight would seep through the gaps in the window paper, casting a small silvery white patch of light on the floor. She listened to the sounds outside. The rustling of wind through the leaves, a distant sound of the night watch drums, occasional barking of dogs, occasional cries of night birds. These sounds seemed especially clear in the silent night, as if coming from somewhere very, very far away. She thought of nights from before. Before, nights were lively. There were palace maids to chat with, music from strings and woodwinds, brightly lit banquets. She had never known what silence was, what darkness was. Now she knew. Silence is a sound louder than any other sound. It drills into your ears, drills into your brain, leaving you nowhere to escape. Darkness is a color heavier than any other. It covers your eyes, covers your heart, leaving you unable to see anything. She lay in the darkness, not knowing how long had passed. Perhaps an hour, perhaps 2 hours, perhaps an entire night. Time lost its meaning in the darkness, becoming blurred and endless. Finally, she fell asleep. Sleep was like a gentle sea slowly drowning her. She sank to the bottom, into a world without the cold palace, without loneliness, without sorrow. In her dream, she became that young woman again, wearing magnificent clothes adorned with exquisite jewelry, walking along the paths of the imperial garden. The sun was bright, flowers fragrant everywhere, and melodious zither music drifted from afar. She smiled in her dreams. She could still smile. Dawn broke. She woke up, another new day. A day just like yesterday, just like the day before, just like tomorrow. She got up, washed her face, combed her hair, and waited for breakfast. Then sat by the window watching that tree in the courtyard, day after day, year after year, until one day she would never wake again. Some people walked out of the cold palace. Such people were rare, extremely rare throughout the long history. They were like shooting stars occasionally streaking across the night sky, scarce and fleeting. But they did exist, and their stories deserve to be told. Let us see how those very few lucky ones saw the light of day again. For a woman to get out of the cold palace, there are usually only a few possibilities. The first is when the emperor passes away. When an emperor dies and a new emperor ascends the throne, the dynamics of the harem often undergo tremendous changes. The new emperor might grant amnesty to the realm, releasing some of those who were imprisoned. Women in the cold palace, if lucky, might be let out. But such luck is far too slim. A new emperor usually has his own harem to manage, his own consorts to arrange. Those women from the previous reign are nothing but burdens to him. He might send them to remote palaces, might have them become nuns, but rarely would he truly release them. The second is when the Empress Dowager shows mercy. If a woman has old ties with the Empress Dowager, or if the Empress Dowager is in a good mood and wants to accumulate merit, she might order the release of a certain woman from the cold palace. This happens occasionally, but it is also very rare. Empress Dowagers usually have more important matters to worry about. The third is a change in the political situation. Sometimes a woman is thrown into the cold palace because her family fell from power. If later her family regains favor, she might be released. But this is even rarer, because the rise and fall of families often takes a very long time, and women in the cold palace rarely live to see that day. The fourth is the most unbelievable one. The emperor remembers her. Let me tell you a story. This story happened in the Ming Dynasty, to a woman named Lady Ji. Lady Ji came from humble origins. Just an ordinary palace maid. She wasn't particularly beautiful, and her personality was quiet, completely unremarkable among the many palace maids. But fate sometimes plays strange tricks. One day the emperor happened to pass by where she worked and saw her. Perhaps the sunlight was just right that day. Perhaps the way she lowered her head happened to touch the emperor's heartstrings. In any case, the emperor favored her. Just that once after that, the emperor forgot about her. Lady Ji became pregnant. This should have been wonderful news. If a palace maid could give birth to a prince, her status would rise dramatically, her fate would completely change. But Lady Ji's luck was bad. She had encountered a powerful enemy, Consort Wan. Consort Wan was the most favored consort at the time. She was 17 years older than the emperor, yet she held his heart firmly in her grasp. She had no children of her own, and she wouldn't allow other women to have children either. Any pregnant consort would be eliminated by her through various means. Consort 1 found out about Lady Ji's pregnancy. Consort 1 sent someone to deal with her, but the person sent had a kind heart and didn't go through with it. They only falsely reported that Lady Ji had fallen ill and sent her to a remote place. That place was the cold palace. Lady Ji gave birth to her child in the cold palace. A boy, she named him Ju Yukeng. What a dangerous secret this was. If Consort Wan learned of this child's existence, she would certainly send someone to kill him. Lady Ji had to hide the child, had to make everyone believe this child didn't exist. The eunuchs and palace maids in the cold palace helped her. They all hated Consort Wan, and they all sympathized with Lady Ji. They secretly brought food for the child, secretly helped Lady Ji take care of him. They used their own meager strength to protect this tiny life. The child grew up in the cold palace. He didn't know he was a prince, didn't know his father was the emperor. He only knew his mother was a gentle woman, that they lived in a run-down courtyard, living a poor but quiet life. 6 years passed. The child grew to 6 years old. He was clever and bright, well-behaved and sensible, the only light in Lady Ji's life. The emperor grew old. He was already over 30, yet had no son. Consort Wan had gotten rid of all the princes, and now the emperor faced the danger of having no heir. One day, an old eunuch, while combing the emperor's hair, suddenly said something. "Your Majesty already has white hair, yet still has no son." The emperor sighed and said, "Yes, this is my greatest regret." The old eunuch knelt down and said, "Your Majesty, actually you have a son." The emperor was shocked. The old eunuch told the emperor about Lady Ji, told him about that night 6 years ago, told him about the child hidden in the cold palace, told him about everything that had happened over these years. The emperor immediately sent people to the cold palace. When he saw that child, he cried. It was a thin and frail boy wearing tattered clothes, with long hair that had never been cut. He timidly looked at this strange man before him, not knowing what was happening. Emperor picked him up and said, "This is my son, my son." Lady Ji was brought out of the cold palace. She finally saw the light of day again. Lady Ji was granted the title of Consort Shu. She moved into a magnificent palace, wore exquisite clothes, and enjoyed the glory and wealth she had never dared to imagine before. Her son was made crown prince, becoming the heir to the empire. Everything seemed like a dream, but this dream was too short. Lady Ji had stayed in the cold palace for too long, and her body had been destroyed by those years of hardship. She was often sick, often coughing, and her complexion was always pale. Moreover, Consort Wan was still there. Consort Wan hated her son, hated that she had taken away Emperor's attention. Although Consort Wan didn't dare to openly harm her anymore, that hatred, like an invisible knife, hung over her head at all times. Less than a year after Lady Ji left the cold palace, she died. Some said she died of illness. Some said she was killed by Consort Wan. The truth can no longer be verified. We only know that when she died, she was only in her 30s. Her son later became Emperor Xiaozong of Ming. He was one of the most virtuous emperors of the Ming dynasty, marrying only one empress in his lifetime and never taking any concubines. Perhaps he was using this way to commemorate his mother, to commemorate the woman who raised him alone in the cold palace. Not all women who came out of the cold palace were as lucky as Lady Ji. Some people came out, only to find the outside world had become completely unrecognizable. Their families had died, their friends had scattered, everyone they knew was gone. They stood in the sunlight, yet felt even lonelier than they had in the cold palace. Some people came out, but couldn't adapt to normal life. They had stayed in the cold palace for too long, already accustomed to that loneliness, that silence, that state of isolation from the world. Suddenly returning to the bustling crowds, they felt fear, unease, completely lost. Some people came out, but soon died anyway. Their bodies had already been destroyed by the cold palace, riddled with illness, beyond any medicine's help. They had finally seen daylight again, yet had no time to enjoy their freedom. The cold palace, even after they left, still hung over the rest of their lives like a curse. What is freedom for the women in the cold palace? Freedom perhaps wasn't walking out that door, wasn't wearing gorgeous clothes again, wasn't regaining the emperor's favor. True freedom perhaps is inner peace. It is accepting one's fate, no longer struggling, no longer resenting. It is finding a piece of sky that belongs to oneself in that small courtyard. It is watching that old locust tree sprout, bloom, shed its leaves and wither, then saying in one's heart, "This is life." Some women found this kind of freedom in the cold palace. They no longer hoped to be released, no longer fantasized about regaining favor. They simply lived quietly, aged quietly, died quietly. Their hearts, like a pool of still water, could no longer stir up any ripples. This was a sorrowful kind of freedom, but perhaps this was the only freedom they could ever have. Those women who walked out of the cold palace, what happened to them afterward? History left no record. They were too insignificant to be worth recording. They were merely specks of dust in the imperial palace, blown up by the wind, then blown down again. No one cared where they went, no one cared whether they lived or died. Perhaps they returned to their hometowns, married ordinary men, and lived ordinary lives. Perhaps they became nuns, spending the rest of their days before dim lamps and ancient Buddha statues. Perhaps they died alone without even a gravestone left behind. We don't know, we only know that they once existed. They were once young, once beautiful, once had dreams, once had hopes. They once spent long years in the cold palace, enduring suffering beyond ordinary imagination. They once waited in the darkness, waiting for a dawn that might never come. Then they vanished, like a drop of water vanishing into the ocean, like a leaf vanishing into the soil, like a wisp of smoke vanishing into the wind, without a sound, without a trace. Night deepened, the moon had tilted westward, the stars began to dim. A rooster crowed in the distance, heralding the coming dawn. Another new day. For those still alive, a new day means new hope. But for those women who have vanished into history, all their days have already ended. Their stories end here, but as long as someone still remembers them, they haven't truly disappeared. They live on in these words, in these stories, in the hearts of everyone who hears their names. This, perhaps, is the meaning of history.